So this is the second quick vidcast on 53(1)(c) Dispositions of Equitable Interests. Let's just recap. In circumstances in which the legal title in property stays in the same place, where the trustee is holding property on trust for Hunter, and Hunter directs that the equitable interest is to be held on trust for other beneficiaries instead, that was held by Viscount Simons to be a disposition of an equitable interest. For Viscount Simons, this is just about the plain meaning of the word disposition. The equitable interest starts here, it ends up here, that's the disposition according to his lordship. Nice and simple. The fact that in the case Gray and the IRC there are all kinds of clever tax avoidance schemes going on is not the kind of thing that Viscount Simons likes. In Vandervelde and the IRC in the House of Lords, following afterwards, making arguments that simply hadn't been advanced in Gray and the IRC, we have a situation in which the beneficiary gives an instruction to a trustee to take the equitable interest and the legal title together and transfer them into a brand new trust where new trustees are holding on trust for a new, different beneficiary. It was held that legal and equitable title moving together does not require signed writing under 53(1)(c). So there's our first way of getting around the Gray and the IRC analysis. In Outtrade and the IRC, as explained by Neville and Wilson, where we have a mother having A shares held on trust for her, and a son having B shares held on trust for him, where the mother and son entered into a contract between them, that the son would transfer the B shares to the mother, and the mother would transfer the A shares to the son, that was held to be a specifically enforceable contract. Because equity looks upon as done that which ought to have been done, equity will deem the equitable interest in the A shares to transfer to the son's trust, and the equitable interest in the B shares to transfer to the mother's trust. Neville and Wilson explained that in modern parlance that creates a constructive trust in this instance, so that the equitable interest passes automatically because of this contract. And because it passes automatically because of the contract, if that contract can be created verbally, and here it can because it relates to shares, then you don't need to satisfy section 53(1)(c) to make a transfer of this particular equitable interest. So there's a second cunning way of getting round section 53(1)(c). Let's have a quick discussion of some others. Other ways of getting round this kind of problem, we have the Re-Lashmar approach, where we have a trustee holding property on trust for a beneficiary. Let's just call that person Ben. And then Ben decides, I want to hold my equitable interest in turn on trust for, let's just call this person Arthur. I suddenly can't think of any other names. What we can do in this circumstance is one of two things. Either Ben can terminate this trust if he is the solely entitled beneficiary under Saunders and Vautier and become absolute owner of this property, and then declare a brand new trust in favour of Arthur. A declaration of a trust is not a disposition of an equitable interest. Why? Westdeutsche Landesbank and Islington tells us, speech of Lord Brown Wilkinson, that what happens when you declare a trust is that you create the equitable interest. It's not like an egg where we already have legal title and equitable interest latent within property in the way that an egg already contains yolk and white. Instead, when we declare a trust over property, we create the equitable interest. So if Ben terminated this trust and got rid of the trustee, so that Ben becomes simply the absolute owner of this property, then Ben can declare a brand new trust over the property, and there is no disposition of an equitable interest because the equitable interest is being created. So that's one way of getting around the problem. Another way is for Ben to keep this first trust in existence and declare instead that Ben holds his equitable interest on a sub-trust in favour of Arthur, just like leases and subleases. The question, according to Re-Lashmar and Granger and Wilberforce, all cases decided before the 1925 Act, is what rights does Ben have? If Ben retains some rights, for example, says any income that I receive from the trustee may be transferred onto Arthur if Arthur has significant need of it within that particular time period. Then that retains some discretion for Ben to decide whether or not Arthur has need of it. And therefore, what's happened in that situation, it's that there has been no disposition of the equitable interest, because Reed, Ashmore and Granger and Wilberforce suggest that there's only a disposition in those old cases if Ben has given away all of Ben's rights. So if Ben simply declares, I hold 100% of all of my rights on subtrust for Arthur, then Ben drops out of the picture, and the main trustee simply looks through Ben and is effectively holding the property directly on trust for Arthur. In that circumstance, if 100% of Ben's equitable interests is now held on this subtrust for Arthur, then Ben does make a disposition of his equitable interest. So it all depends in this subtrust idea, where we keep the head trust going and Ben is going to hold on subtrust for Arthur. It all depends on whether or not Ben has made a disposition of 100% of his rights, or whether he has held back some office, some discretion, for example, for himself, so there has not been a complete disposition. Okay? If you hold back some rights, there's no disposition, no need for signed writing under section 53(1)(c). Cool, huh? Let's do something to really annoy you now. Let's go back to Gray and the IRC, given hopefully that you've understood all that. And let's remember what happened there. We had a trustee holding property on trust for Hunter. So I'm going to have to write it and then show you what it looks like. Trustee holding on trust for Hunter. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 beneficiaries over here. After the decision in Van der Velde and the IRC, if you recall, we decided that if we transfer the legal and equitable title together, then, as in Van der Velde and the IRC, that's not a disposition of an equitable interest under 53(1)(c). So looking at these facts, what we actually have is we have trustees of all of these various trusts in favour of the grandchildren. There are actually 6 different trusts in existence, and therefore probably the better analysis is that we therefore have 6 different trustees in different capacities holding on the terms of these 6 separate settlements, and that Hunter's trustees are a 7th set of trustees in a 7th capacity. Now, in the world here, in fact, they were the same human beings, the same trustees throughout. But, given that these are different settlements, we should think about this as being not simply a change of trustee, where we have this trustee holding on trust for Hunter to start with, and then for these children's settlements afterwards. Instead, we should think about it as being a transfer of an equitable interest from Hunter up to his trustees, so that the equitable interest comes out of this settlement, together with the legal title, because we have this trustee transferring his or her legal title to these trustees, even though it's the same human beings, operating in different capacities. And therefore, look, we have legal and equitable title moving at once from this 1955 settlement into the separate 1949 settlements, and therefore we could have argued in Gray and the IRC that we should have had the same analysis as is accepted in the House of Lords in Van der Velde and the IRC. Why don't we? Because this case is decided by Viscount Simons, and I think his lordship simply didn't want to know about these kind of clever tax avoidance techniques, let alone try and permit them to exist. What goes wrong for Mr. Van der Velde, very, very briefly, in Van der Velde and the IRC, is that there is an option here to buy these shares back at the end of Van der Velde and the IRC. That was an equitable interest that in those shares that was unallocated on the facts, and therefore it was held that those shares must be deemed to be held on resulting trust for Van der Velde's settlement, and so Van der Velde was liable for the tax on those shares, and therefore the tax scam worked, but we got round 53(1)(c).